Good evening, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. I was going to run a little bit different format tonight from what we typically have done. I wanted to just talk for a couple of minutes about the death of George Floyd. I don't usually like to bring national issues into local discussions because we typically don't have an impact there, but this one's a little different. I have always been a huge supporter of the police. I've worked very close with them as all these years on the select board, working with Roger, and have a tremendous amount of respect for him and his officers and the work that they do and how difficult it is. And I even, my son is a police officer. But in the police officers, there's a motto of serve and protect. When a police officer is apprehending and arresting someone, they're serving the community. When they have someone in custody with their arms behind their back and with cuffs on and laying on the street, that's when the police responsibility is to protect. And you have Floyd was with handcuffs on, totally incapable of protecting himself, not only from harming himself or from anyone else hurting him. And that's where it's the police officer's responsibility, as in their care, to protect him. Not only was he not protecting him, but the video that we've all seen with his knee on George's neck and quite literally killing him is very barbaric. There's really not even any words that you can express to talk about what that was and meant and what he did. I certainly hope that he's prosecuted to the fullest degree of the law, and those other officers that were not fulfilling their responsibility of protecting someone should be as well face the consequences. And of course, out of that has come protests that have gone across the whole nation for very good reason, and they've all been or the legitimate protests have been peaceful and for legitimate reasons. Unfortunately, and I'm going to use the word thugs, there have been thugs that have taken over the message, hijacked the message, and have been doing the rioting and the looting and things of that nature. Now, while here in Johnson, we've not seen anything to this degree, we've not been completely immune from it either as well. Over the last couple of years, we've had a few incidences where minorities in our community have had racial slurs slung at them and racially harassed. And that's not Johnson. Johnson is much better than that. And while we've not seen the rioting and the looting that's been going on, we have had vandalism to public property. And that happened recently down at the skate park. And all of this is very disheartening to see what's happening across our country and not knowing where our country is going or where it's going to end and how this will end. But in all of this despair, there is sometimes a glimmer of light and hope that comes out. And I got an email with a picture sent to me with two young boys that were painting over the graffiti and the vandalism that was done here in Johnson down at the skate park. And that gives you a little bit of hope that in the future generations, there is good, and there is good in a lot of us. And unfortunately, maybe you don't see it, because what we see on the news is not the good. Now, these are my words. I'm just a redneck Vermonter, and I'm not politically correct all the time. I expect the select board will be issuing a statement, and I'm sure it'll be much more eloquent and politically correct than what I can say. I also think that when this cop goes to prison, justice will find him. And that's not politically correct, I'll admit that. But on behalf of the town, I want to send out prayers to George Floyd family and hope that they find peace. And thank you for allowing me these few minutes to say this. With that, I'll move on. Today, the governor's news conference, as you all have probably seen and heard, there's a little bit of an outbreak in Winooski that's going on. In fact, with dozens of positives. The state is on top of this. They're working with the Winooski officials. And because they have had time and were prepared and have things in place to deal with these kind of spikes that are expected to happen around the state at different times, it is not changing the course that they're on as far as, in the governor's words, continuing to open the spigot. While it's unfortunate, it is happening in Winooski. The good news is he is continuing to open the spigot. And one of those items is indoor dining, although it'll be limited, is going to be starting on Monday at 25% capacity. And also, if you're driving into Vermont, coming from some of our local, surrounding states, if you're coming from an area that has a low infection rate, there will not be a quarantine requirement. He's also increasing lodging up to 50% capacity. And he also shared that the PPP, which is a payment protection plan, was passed by Congress, and it's anticipated the president will be signing it, and that will extend the PPP program out to the end of the year. It's more local with MVU and then Vermont Studio Center. We've been in contact with them. While we don't have a direct role in how they come back online, they have been willing to work with us and keep us aware of what their plans are so that we can be prepared at the community level if we need to. And they are very much in their infancy stages, but they are looking at plans and working on how they may be able to come back into in-person and how that would look in the fall or late summer. There are NVU summer activities planned for this summer, and I'm not going to speak to them, but I've had people questioning me. I will ask Leah or John to elaborate on those if they feel they can share at this time. I also would like to just bring up another matter, that Johnson's participation in the census is at 39%, which is very far below the state average. And this does affect federal funding and state funding, so it is very important. If anybody on the call or Zoom here has not done the census, please do. If you know someone who has not, please encourage them to do it. And lastly, if Gordy is on, he had a few words he wanted to say. We may not recognize him because I understood that he had his hair cut the day before I did, and we may not even recognize him. But if he's not there, then we'll just turn it over to Meredith.
We just wanted to quickly share that at the annual village elections that occurred this past Tuesday, all articles passed, including the village budget. Phil Wilson and Gordy Smith were reelected as trustees. Rosemary Audibert was reelected as the village clerk treasurer, and Eric was reelected as village president. So no surprises, and we'll look forward to hopefully having our village meeting under normal circumstances next year. Thank you.
And I understand you had a pretty good turnout.
Yep, 125 votes, which is pretty good for us.
Perfect. Okay, with that, and also, I'm not sure Dave may be able to actually speak more on the PPP. I'm not sure if the banks are involved with that. But tonight's featured speaker is Dave Silverman. He's the CEO and president of the Union Bank, as well as a State College Board trustee member. He's a 1985 graduate of the Johnson State College, and he's been with the Union Bank for 34 years. Tonight, Dave will speak to the bank's assistance that's been provided through the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as what he anticipates the bank's role will be going forward during the economic recovery. And I also asked if Dave would share his thoughts on the state college status. And with that, it gives me great honor and privilege to welcome and introduce Dave Silverman. Go ahead.
Well, thanks, Eric. I'm kind of intimidated having to follow Dr. Levine. I understand spoke last week, and he's done monumental good works for the state, and so it's an honor to follow him. Just to follow up on your comments, you know, I'm a proud JSC graduate in 1985, and feel like I have really strong ties to the community, and there's a lot of friendly faces or a lot of friendly names that I see. Hi, Linda, family friend. But anyway, so yeah, I've been I'm an unusual bank CEO. Most of us have worked at more than one bank, but I've been at the Union Bank for a very long time. I followed a path of commercial lending and was the bank's senior lender for many years until becoming CEO in 2012, which time just flies. My connection to the bank is really a Johnson connection as well. I took a course called Money in Banking from an adjunct professor my last semester in my senior year. The fellow's name that taught that course was Ken Gibbons, who many of you know. And he's my predecessor. And when the semester was over, he asked me what I was doing for the rest of my life, I guess. And, you know, the rest is sort of history. When I started at the bank, we had 70 million in assets and 70 employees and maybe 5 offices. We now have about $980 million in assets, 200 employees, 18 offices from Western Vermont to Eastern New Hampshire, mostly, well, entirely in the northern parts of both states. I live in Morrisville and married into a local family. The Welch Round Barn is the local landmark, and that's the family I married into. And my wife and I live right around the corner from the barn. So I want to talk about a few things. I want to start with the bank, both our bank and the banking industry's participation in the pandemic response from an economic perspective. I can definitely give you an update on the PPP program because there's legislation that, as Eric said, should be signed by the president, and I think it really improves an otherwise difficult program. And then I can give a little commentary on the state colleges, and then I'm happy to answer questions. So, first of all, let's talk about the PPP. That particular program, that was a program that was accessed primarily through banks and other institutions that provide similar financing. The rollout was both impressive and nerve-wracking at the same time, because the program happened so quickly and there was so little guidance from the federal government that it was very hard. And eventually, I think the banks, and I think really the community banking industry in particular, essentially just took a leap of faith and said, you know what, we don't know all the details, but we have to do this to help our small businesses. And so we literally, to me, it felt like kind of stepping off a cliff and saying, we're going to do this. And to put some context around that, we've done about $68 million worth of PPP loans for almost 700 of our business clients. Our footings, or in other businesses you might call it our capital, is about 70 million. So we essentially committed our entire capital to the program. And for a guy in my chair, that felt pretty unsettling. But we did it. I mean, we were told that these would be 100% guaranteed by the SBA, thereby the federal government. But we've been SBA lenders for a long time, and they have this process called a guarantee repair, which is basically a bureaucratic way of saying, a guarantee repair is really a denying of your guarantee. So so we went into this with trepidation, but knowing that we needed to do that. And we're glad we did, because there's some enlightened self-interest in all this, in that if our businesses survive, that certainly helps us do better, obviously. But it's not just that. We're also part of the community, and we want to help our friends and neighbors. So in addition to the PPP, which was a huge push, and I will tell you that actually a couple of our staff people who are Johnson residents were key people in that early push, the very first weekend. I don't know if you recall, some of you may, that this thing was rolled out on a Friday, and there was a thought that there would be no money left by Monday, or something along those lines. So we had our staff work all weekend trying to get these things processed through the SBA to get the funds reserved for our clients. And two very key people, Karen Blanchard-Smith and Danica Berry, who I think both live in town. I know they're both Johnson graduates like me. They were key elements of this whole effort. In addition to the PPP, and I will go back to that with the updates, but we also started fielding phone calls from mortgage borrowers and consumer borrowers, and literally at the same time we were dealing with closing the branch network. So the first 4 or 5 weeks of this thing, it was pretty hard. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I know we've all gone through difficult times, but we're considered an essential service, so we stayed open. And we had not unlike, although I would not draw a parallel, but I had frontline staff that were concerned about handling money, which rightly you can understand that. Certainly not not the major push that our healthcare workers and our grocery workers have done, but we did have people at the front line that were a bit uncomfortable. Anyway, we had a lot of scared borrowers calling us, and on the business side, we did a lot of proactive outreach, calling on our borrowers, looking to see what we could do for them. I have to give our federal regulators some real kudos. they gave us some very strong, timely guidance on how to handle forbearances and loan modifications. That was extremely helpful because it was timely and it gave us confidence to be able to do things for our borrowers without being criticized by the regulators, because of course we're an extremely highly regulated industry, and plus we have these accounting rules that we have to deal with. So kudos to the federal regulators of the banking industry. They were on this extremely quickly, and they were extremely helpful. So as a result, we were able to talk to people and offer payment forbearances, offer loan modifications, and we did that. I mean, and I can give you some, a handle on that. We've processed about 400 residential loan forbearance requests that we've approved, and about 300 business payment modifications. Our stance on that has been light-handed, meaning that if somebody has wanted a payment deferral, we really have in general granted those deferrals without a whole lot of gnashing of teeth. Maybe we acted a little unbankerly in that case, but we also had some things where we had people calling in just for reassurance. Yeah, I'm okay now, but I just want to know what my options are. And we spent a lot of time, and we had to move people around to staff up to be able to handle the influx of calls. But we're pretty pleased with the reaction. I still think that we won't know for months. The depth of the business impact. There's a lot of things going on, including the payment modifications and forbearances, the PPP money, the EIDL money, another round of state funding that frankly is masking to an extent the depth of the problem. And I don't think we'll really know until that money is shut off. So, we've got a pile of artificial stimulus that's helping the economy, and that won't go on forever, right? And that's when we'll really, I think, know. I don't think we'll know fully until 2021 or so. And I think a lot of it in Vermont will have to do with how quickly the travel and tourism business can get back on their feet. But as far as sort of working with our community going forward, we obviously are going to be an active participant in the local economy, and we're going to, our stance will be no different than it ever has been, which is we try to work with people to allow them to survive. And we're able to do that, but that's sort of that's our way. I mean, in banking circles, you can describe credit cultures, or at least one facet of it is either being an exit bank or being a workout bank. And what that means is, there are some banks that at the first sign of trouble, they want you gone. And then there's other banks that are workout banks, which is our model, which is, we try to work with people that are having difficulty, and we try to help them get, down the road and survive. And frankly, that's self-interested, but it's also community interested. So, that's, it's not over yet. Our branches have been open since last Wednesday. We're asking people to wear masks. People have been really good about that for the most part. And, we anticipate, following the governor's lead as far as, the spigot turning and reopening our operations. Interestingly enough, through this whole thing, The residential, our residential lending business has been off the charts. Both refinances and purchases have been off the charts. It's amazing what you can find out when you have to really try to figure things out. I mean, now, we used to close loans in offices, and now we're closing loans on the tailgates of pickups and the hoods of cars. And literally, I mean, in some of our offices, you might see 2 or 3 groups of people outdoors, and they're closing mortgage loans. But that, we've had to figure out how to do things. I'm very thankful to the town clerks that have hung in there and allowed even limited access for title work so we can get things done, because this low interest rate environment is helping people, because if they can get a lower rate and a lower payment, that takes a little pressure off of them economically. So I think I can wrap up with maybe a comment about the Vermont State Colleges, and then I can open it up for Q&A if that works, Eric.
Yep.
Okay, so my first thought is that, so in 2017, I was approached by a group from the state colleges, and they asked me if I would be willing to be honored to be inducted into the Vermont State Colleges Hall of Fame, which is a great honor, and I accepted. I did not read the fine print, and I did not see in the fine print that by March of 2018, I would end up becoming a board member on the Board of Trustees. So whether that was a nefarious way of recruiting me or not, I'm not sure. But I joined and gladly to give back to the colleges that meant so much to me. I mean, literally, I wouldn't be where I am today without NVU Johnson, or I still think of it as Johnson State. So I was happy to serve. But I will tell you that I'm a finance guy, right? So I know how to read financial statements. And once I really dug into the financial statements, it became crystal clear to me. I mean, it was not rocket science. I mean, it was instantaneously clear to me, and one of my reactions was, wow, what have I gotten myself into? But I think there's a reason that I was selected, which is because I'm a finance guy. And I think the chancellor at the time knew that, people like me needed to become aware of these issues and hopefully, have a voice. So I'm going to make a statement that I've heard elsewhere. I'm not sure if I've heard it in the exact same phrasing. But, the state colleges have been criminally underfunded for decades. This is not a secret, right? I mean, when I was there in the mid 80s, our funding from the state was near 50% of the state college budget. It got as low as 15% in 2016, and the former chancellor was able to get modest increases out of the legislature that brought that funding up to about 17%. But, we have had structural deficits for the last several years. The former chancellor asked for more money repeatedly. Now, whether he was forceful enough, why he wasn't heard, let's face it, there's budget, there's the state has lots of budget uses for money. But for whatever reason, let's face it, this goes back, years and years and years and decades, So it's not just on our last chancellor. What I've said to people is it's everybody's fault and it's nobody's fault. Every one of us that has had a vote and just sort of stayed silent, like so many things in our society now. I started to try to reach out. I hope Dan will remember. I hijacked a couple of Vermont Bankers Association meetings with a plea to our local legislators, not just in Lamoille County, but also in Caledonia County, because our bank has feet there. In fact, we have an office in Lyndonville. And I've been trying to sound a warning. Dan, I know you remember, right? So I think that, all things happen for a reason. Maybe Jeb Spalding ended up having to take one for the team to finally get some focus on the colleges. And hopefully now we're heard, because these colleges are critical. They are the access institutions for our kids that might not have a chance to go to school. Johnson was my second chance. I screwed up my first one, and thank God I could go to Johnson and I've done okay, like a lot of my fellow alum. So I feel very, very badly for the current students. This has been terrible turmoil for them. Especially we have a young lady that works, just started here as an intern, a business management accounting major, and she's going into her senior year and facing a lot of uncertainty. And we have there's 20 or 25 of us here at the bank that are NVU graduates, and I don't know how I run the bank without that source of workforce. So this has been a hard road to get where we are, but I'm hopeful for the future, and the fact that we seem to now have the attention of the legislature. I think that there's NVU has a terrific team. Elaine Collins is awesome. I was privileged to be on her search committee when we hired her, and I think that she is the leader to lead us through this. So I guess with that, I'll stop and see if anybody has questions.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Brian, you want to look out there for hands raised?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions from chat and a couple people with their hands raised. So first up, I've got Shane. Okay, Shane, go ahead.
Hey, my connection isn't great tonight, so I might not be the greatest, to listen to. But David, thank you for being here, and thank you for all your work throughout this whole kind of VSC situation. I know a lot of people out here have felt like you are somewhat of our regional representative on the Board of Trustees, and so I wanted to ask you about that. I've been working with a group of people that kind of came out of the massive 10,000 person Facebook group that spawned out of the crisis, the state funding crisis. And we started calling ourselves VSCS Thrive. We're working on putting together a set of policies and a bunch of other things to come forward with to move the conversation forward in a productive way. One of the things that we're looking at is the idea of reconstituting the board to have some more regional representation. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, whether you feel like the current regional breakdown of the board is sufficient, and whether it creates a system that well serves the entire state.
So
I know it's
that's,
a big question. I'm sorry.
well, it is a big question, and it's one that I've dwelled on a little bit, because, you know, the way you get on that board is that there's three ways, and the at least my understanding, you know, number one, there are legislative appointees, so by definition, they are legislators. There are gubernatorial appointees. And then the board is allowed to appoint people, but that's a limited amount of people. You know, you know, I have a real question whether political appointees is the best way to govern the state college system. I mean, when they're kicking in 50%, I think they get a right to have a vote. When they're putting in 15%, I think their ability to have the majority of the board should be diminished. I'll probably get thrown off for that comment. So be it. So I think that the governance, which really is the board, is appropriately something to be examined. And I think the idea of regional representation, particularly, you know, the fact that at the moment there's not a representative from the Northeast Kingdom, you know, I try to advocate for both areas because my business spans both. But yes, so the short answer is I would be supportive of that concept, but that probably there's, you know, that's going to take some kind of political maneuvering, I think, you know, or at least dealing with our bylaws and our enabling statutes to deal with that governance issue. But I think it's certainly a valid thing to examine.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Shane. Beth, I've got you up next. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, David. Thanks for joining us. It's much appreciated. I have questions around, since you're a finance guy, around the funds received by the VSC and the appropriations formula around those. As we know, there was an appropriations formula change a couple years ago, I believe. The timing may be wrong, but it was as part of the NVU merger, there was an appropriations change in terms of the calculations that VSC is responsible for, which reduced, if we split it by campus, it actually reduced campus to reduce the allowance to each of the NVU campuses as a whole if compared to other campuses. So my question to you is about, and I believe also it is referred to as a need-based appropriation, and I think there's a pretty fair argument that need base should be reassessed and that formula reassessed to have a more fair distribution to help support NVU and our communities in all of northern Vermont, frankly. You know, all those connections you talked about in terms of community connections, all impacted by the health of NVU. So my question to you is, one, what is the VSC plans around this? And two, what is your view on the distribution and the formula as it is and what it should be? Thanks.
Super thoughtful question. You probably won't like my answer. So the problem with the Vermont State Colleges is that we're a system. We're a formal system intertwined, and our debt is shared. So this is going to sound wrong, but this sort of apportionment of the state funding is almost smoke and mirrors in my mind, because the bottom line is we have one bottom line that determines success or failure. And so it's really not about how we divvy up the money internally so much as it's about having enough money for the entire system to survive and thrive. So, I mean, that's my opinion on that. It may not be right, but that's you know, the presidents are held to those budgets and asked to work within those. And as far as so there was two pieces to the formula move, just so you're aware. There was a special appropriation to assist the merger, and there was some recognition that the merger would require additional, almost what you would call capital, to be able to pull. And then there was the change in the appropriation. But honest to goodness, my opinion is that the root issue is just simply not enough funding for the entire system.
I understand. I mean, I understand. There's no doubt about the fact that the state does not give higher ed enough money. I don't think you'll find a single person to argue that on this call. But there is some control that's allowed. So I hear you. There's two different formulas. One is to build a sustainable future, which, by the way, the proposal that came out by the chancellor's office tore down the foundation that was beginning to build. So I would just argue that there's a probably greater need now of that appropriation formula than there was before. That's the first thing. And I know there's a whole bunch of committee talk and a whole bunch of committee work around this. I was on actually the NVU committee. But so there's that piece that is needed. And then there's also making sure that allocation allows for NVU to be sustainable within the VSC system long-term. So, I mean, I guess that I hear you don't have a good answer and I'm not gonna like it. Got it. But I mean, my request is that, you know, you really fight for us and fight for our community to get the financial support we need and make sure that it's a fair allocation and a fair distribution within VSC.
Well, I think that's an entirely fair request, and I will honor that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, Greg. Okay, Greg, go ahead.
Hey, David, how are you?
Good, Greg.
So I'm thinking, you know, we've been talking a lot about money and you're obviously underfunded. But what I'm more interested in is the future. I wonder how we're going to differentiate Johnson from every other college in the nation. You know, we need to offer something that brings people in that's different than they can get everywhere else. And it seems like we're just kind of like everybody else. You know, I'm talking colleges throughout the country. And I think until we have a leader that can focus on the future, and that may be incorporating some type of business in with this college that can pay a little rent or can, you know, somehow raise some revenue. I don't think the same. I hear everybody talking money, but I don't hear anybody talking, where do we go from here? And if we have, honestly, the same old ideas, the same old people, the same, it's just not going to work. You're going to be right back in the same place 5 years from now. So I guess my question is, who or what, or is there a board that's looking out to the future to see what we can do to get more people? Because that's what it comes down to. You need more students. And so I guess that's my question, Dave.
So I think Leah may want to respond to this, but I'll take a shot at it first. So we have put together a task force to look at those issues on a system-wide basis. And there are constituents from all four campuses looking at the very things that you've talked about. We had a long day on Monday of Board of Trustee committee meetings. And at our long-range planning meeting, we heard from all of our presidents, including our interim president at Castleton. And the ideas that are coming out of the campuses are tremendous. And the cooperation among the campuses appears to be better than it ever has been, which is critical because it hasn't always been exceptional. But my impression based on listening to the presidents, and by the way, we have a terrific group of presidents, Dr. Collins being incredibly strong. And there, in fact, Greg, there were ideas that we're talking about. In fact, that's one of Dr. Collins's major initiatives, is actually working with and bringing businesses on campus as essentially residents there to be able to, you know, offset some of the overhead of some of the facilities, but also create the opportunity where students can work with these businesses as part of internships. So there is a lot of innovative thinking that is going on. And, you know, I would compare it to the things that we business people are going through with this pandemic. Everything is happening faster. I mean, because we all have a fire under us. We got to do something. And so, you know, what might take 2 or 3 or 4 years in the real world, you know, in the pandemic world, things are happening fast. And, you know, this task force, I believe they're supposed to be giving the Board of Trustees preliminary findings in August. And that is fast. That's unusually fast. No disrespect for the academics in the room, but academia doesn't typically work that quickly. But it seems to be supercharged right now.
I think that's kind of the same road that I'm thinking, you know, is, you know, this college is so important to our town of Johnson that I think everybody wants to do whatever they can to help you succeed. And I think we've got to be different. As you know, we run our business. We're different. We're versatile. We do many different things. And that's what makes us successful. And you got to stay on the cutting edge of what's coming. So I'm glad to hear you're doing that. And thank you for coming out tonight, David.
Eric, if I may. Hi, I'm
Yep.
Leah from Northern Vermont University. I also wanted to recognize David. Union Bank is a big supporter of Northern Vermont University. They support internships. They have several interns at their branches, and I do believe they often end up hiring an MVU grad right upon graduation. So we are grateful for your support. As David mentioned, President Collins did present to the Board of Trustees on Monday some of the work that the NVU Strong Advisory Committee, of which Beth Foy is a member, some recommendations that they have been working on that President Collins will bring forward to the Board of Trustees in, I believe, mid-June. And a big component of that is this learn work ecosystem in which, yes, we have companies that may lease or have space on our campuses and have a direct pathway where our students, it's built into their curriculum that they have hands-on work with these businesses, but it also will formalize other partnerships that we have in the community, such as the internships, co-op experiences, maybe a class assignment or project, but a way of formalizing these hands-on relevant experiences that connects them directly with a local business, either in person or even remotely. But that's a key component of one of the recommendations coming from the advisory committee. So I know President Collins looks forward to telling you more about that. I don't know, Beth, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Okay, Beth.
That sums it up really nicely. I mean, I think that the real goal is to make sure that we're incorporating all stakeholders. So it's really important that the students get a lot out, and it's a positioning the school differently than the school has been positioned in the past. And then also making sure that faculty is supportive in building these out into the curriculum, and it's not something that is traditional schooling, frankly, higher education. And then also it's important to our communities because it helps with supporting the workforce need and prepping the students with professional service skills before they get into the professional world. And, you know, we can't neglect the idea of networking too. I mean, I can tell you my last 2 jobs I've been at for approximately, well, 10 years, the last job, and this job for 3 years now. And it's in management, and it was all through networking. So networking is a crucial part to entering the workforce. So getting students those skills is really important.
One more aspect of it is also the building of on and off ramps so that you can come in for learning to the degree that you want, be it a certification, an associate's, a bachelor's, a master's. You can come in, leave, come back in easily, stackable credits. And also with a goal of these business partnerships helping to make it more affordable overall to get a degree.
Right. So yeah, the report will list a bunch of objectives
Yeah,
that we were trying to meet, and it'll talk about, yeah, all the different objectives, of which there are more.
I had some fun updates for NVU, but I don't want to detract from the Q&A, so I'll step back out so the Q&A can finish.
So we'll come back to that. I've got a couple questions from chat. The first one was asking if the federal government was meeting its obligations as its part of the payment protection program. Is the Union Bank being repaid for its loans?
So it's too soon to tell. Well, that's not entirely true. So, you know, there's some aspects of the CARES Act that are little known that we've already seen some positive results on. One of those is that if you happen to have an SBA guaranteed loan, the CARES Act provides for your loan payments being paid for 6 months by the government. And we've actually received those monies and applied those on behalf of our clients to their SBA loans. So for people that have had an SBA loan, you know, not only have they, you know, don't have to make their payments for 6 months, but somebody has paid them for them. So that's, you know, like a direct principal reduction to their obligation. As far as the way the PPP program works, which I can cover some of those updates as well. You know, those loans are 100% guaranteed by the SBA, which is essentially the US government. There are some fees involved that we will receive. We have not received them yet, but they're also, the receipt is tied to the forgiveness process, and the forgiveness process has been delayed, which is actually a good thing, and I'll explain that in a second. You know, the interest rate on those loans is 1%. And those fees that we get are essentially enabling us to accept such a low interest rate because, you know, our overhead is the equivalent of 2.1% or some number like that. So it's hard for us to make a living on a 1% loan, but the fees do make it a little bit easier. And I have every confidence that the federal government will stand behind what they've told us, because literally, if they do a wide spread across the board reneging on all of their obligations, they will make banks fail. And I don't think they'll want to do that on top of everything else. we're an important part of the economy. So I have some pretty good confidence in that. I also wanted to make another comment. I'm not a political person by nature, and I'm not going to get into politics at all. But I will say that the response to this pandemic by the federal government has been a miracle. A lot of the credit I would give to the Federal Reserve Chair, Chairman Powell, who, as many of you know, is not a large favorite of the president. He has been ingenious. He has been right when a lot of us were wrong. When he went and in early days took the federal funds rate to zero, guys like me didn't like that because we knew it would hurt our bottom line. But in retrospect, the facilities that have come out of the Federal Reserve have provided so much liquidity that our economy would be in far worse shape had they not acted promptly. Likewise, the PPP program, the rollout was bumpy, but they put $650 billion at work in record time. I mean, they put programs together and got money out on the street with the help of banks, but they promulgated the programs. And look, those programs were not perfect. They were designed before we understood that the entire economy would be shut down to save the nation. That was not anticipated when they were figuring out this PPP program. And the fact of the matter is that the fixes that they've put in place that I hope the president signs will make the PPP far more useful, far easier to get forgiveness. And so, I mean, I want to give a little reference to those opinions because I'm sure they're not widely held. But if you go back to the last Great Recession, when we could begin to see signs of that starting to crack in 2007. Most of the major pieces of legislation addressing that didn't happen until like 2009, 10, and 11, when the TARP and some of those other things came into being. So if you compare the reaction of that recession, now it also helps to understand, and I'm sure we all do, that recession was a financial recession and it was caused by the greedy national banks, frankly. This recession, this is about a virus that has forced us to willingly shut our economy down. So they look entirely different. The way I've explained it is the pace and the magnitude are like nothing we've ever seen, especially the pace. This thing has just been like a rocket ship as far as how we're having to react. And, most traditional recessions, they creep up on you slowly. And, obviously this one, there's no creeping about it, right? So let me take a couple seconds really quick and just explain some of the enhancements that should be passed shortly. I'm going to outline the key ones. The key is extending the period where expenses that a business undertakes can be forgiven go from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. That is huge. I mean, this should allow most of our businesses to get full forgiveness of their loans, which then that essentially means that money has become a grant, which is awesome. It lowers the amount of your forgiveness that has to be dedicated to payroll from 75% to 60%. There's a little clunky piece there that eliminates any forgiveness if you don't hit the 60% threshold. And that is worrisome for some businesses, but there's a hope that there might be a rulemaking fix rather than a legislative fix that can address that after the fact. It extends the forbearance on the beginning of those loan payments until it's probably going to be to the end of the year. So, I mean, those three things are huge, and make what was a program that almost couldn't be used by the travel and tourism business because of the time frame of reopening to something that they very well may be able to use more effectively. So, I'm thrilled. This is a good result for our borrowers and for the industry. So anyway, I'll be quiet now.
Thank you, Dave. We are beyond the top of the hour. Is there one more question maybe? And then I'd like to turn it over to Leah to share some of the summer activities that may be happening up at the college, this campus this summer.
Okay. Yes, we've got one more question. So Eric Hutchins, I've unmuted you.
Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Yes,
can hear
we
you.
can.
Excellent. Thank you. Dave, thanks so much for being here. And I really appreciate your service to the State Colleges Board and to our community through the bank. I have some suggestions and thoughts to kind of expand the conversation on NVU Johnson and funding. And I'm glad that Representative Hill and Representative Noyes are here to hear this as well. It's unfortunate that Senator Westman has chosen not to join us again. As a teacher at Lemuel Union High School, I'm glad you referred to the role of NVU Johnson as critical to our community. Both the economic viability of our community depends on the college. The workforce training, as you well know from your perspective, depends on the college. And also, for a lot of our students graduating from Lemuel Union High School, that is their only option as a place to go to school, right? The affordability of the school and the fact that they can live at home, work at home, help provide childcare, elder care for their families, work on the farm, and still get an education is something they don't have the opportunity to do anywhere else. The loss of that school would destroy this community in a number of ways and a number of levels. So that it's completely critical is, I'm glad I'm something that you understand. The threat to close down the college, maybe it was a political move and it's gotten the attention it deserves, but it has shaken the community in a number of ways. That also brings up another point about the statutory responsibility of the board. Closing the schools is not part of the statutory responsibility of the board, right? The responsibility of the board is to fund and promote and advance the schools. It's the General Assembly's job to authorize the closing of the school. So that recommendation was beyond statutory responsibility. Also, speaking of statutory responsibility, it says that it should be funded in whole or substantial part by the Vermont legislature, which is clearly not happening. So I think we really need to expand the conversation that when we talk about fully funding the state colleges, particularly NVU, Johnson, and Castleton, it needs to not just be a couple more %, right? We need to really radically fund this system because it is critical to our community. And when people think, well, where's the money going to come from? Where's the money going to come from? I got a pretty good idea here. I was looking at the state budget, and my numbers are I think they're pretty close here. Both UVM and the state college system educate about 13,000 students. In the last budget, I believe UVM received $41 million in state funding, and the state college system received $31 million, $10 million less. When I went to UVM, half the students that went there were Vermont residents. Now that's 23%, whereas the state college system is 60% in-state residents. That we would underfund those schools while I would say overfunding UVM is right on, without the pandemic, a problem. And now that we're going into the pandemic, and as you know, as a banker, there are institutions that are going to survive this economic depression, and there are ones that are not. I'm thinking UVM's going to make it, right? They're probably going to pull through one way or the other, no matter how the state funds that institution. But we know that each of these colleges may not, and that if that occurs, the economic damage from that will cascade through all of rural Vermont. So I think thinking about proposals, we're not talking about 5 or 10 or 20% more now. We need to put the pain for this pandemic where institutions can handle it. And we need to put the funding where institutions desperately need it. And so I really think that's what we need to do. And I know that this is not necessarily your charge. This is largely up to the legislature, but I think to fight meaningfully for radical funding for these schools is critically important to education in the state, to the economy in rural Vermont, and that there's the political appointees on the colleges board, and that the influence of Chittenden County and the legislature has really damaged our rural communities. And to say that out loud and to say vociferously, we need to put this money where it belongs and fund the state colleges, not just, so they can economically survive, so they can operate at a loss because they are important to serve something other than making money. They serve to educate our workforce. They serve to provide economic opportunities for our kids, college opportunities for our kids that they would not otherwise have. Kids who get into UVM from our community, if they can't do that, they can get in someplace else. They can do it. Kids who get into MB and Johnson from our community, if that is not an option for them, they may not be able to afford travel, room, board, the ability to go someplace else. So I think we need to reevaluate our priorities in the legislature, and that the board needs to uptake its statutory responsibility in full, which is to promote and wholly fund these institutions. And I'm sorry I talked at you for so long there, Dave. I see you patiently listening. But if you could give me some feedback on my suggestions, I would really appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
I'd be happy to, and I agree with most of what you've just said. But I want to acknowledge one thing that you said, which is the way things transpired through this process were not the way they should have. There were absolutely mistakes made. But I also want to be very clear that the Board of Trustees didn't see a proposal on this and never debated a proposal on this. The last time the full board actually saw a proposal was about a year ago. And that was when we had a retreat at the Lake Maury Inn. And coming out of that retreat, we made a statement that said that we wanted to continue all of the campuses. We had been in conversations with the people at the very highest levels of state government, talking to them directly about the troubles that the pandemic were causing. And there was zero in the way of encouragement that there was going to be extra money for the state college system. So, we were in a bad way. But, events sort of took hold and some things became public that weren't appropriately public because they had not been agreed upon by the board. But unfortunately, I don't want to just write it all off to the pandemic, but haste is not a good thing, and we were literally facing a financial crisis. But I will also want to point out and give you the feedback that there's a specific reason that I choose to use the words criminally underfunded. And it goes back to the same statute that you've just paraphrased, that you're right. And Beth said it earlier, nobody can argue the point that these schools have been underfunded. And while I believe that the trustees have a role in trying to affect change. It can't only be us, because we don't have that much power. You obviously look at the underfunding. I mean, if we had a real voice, we'd get the money we needed. So it's got to be grassroots. That's the only, and that's essentially what has happened, right? I mean, you know, bad press happened. People realized how at risk the system was, and the people's voice rose. And all of a sudden, the legislature is figuring out how to get us money to survive. Horrible way to run things, right? But that's the way it all rolled out. And I apologize for my role in that. It did not go the way any of us would have wanted it to go. And for that, I'm deeply sorry, because I spent a year as an admissions counselor, and worked in admissions when I was, for work study. And I get, I was that kid a million years ago that would take, parents and kids on their tours and try to talk them into coming to school. And I was that guy that went to Long Island and New Jersey and tried to recruit. And so I know what people are thinking about when they're choosing schools, and what they're thinking about. And to have people think that the school might not survive and how that impacts admissions, yeah, I get that. I mean, I get that in spades. It's a horrible thing. I wish we could write it. I wish we could take it all back.
Well, Dave, we've gone well over the allotted time that we're paying you to be here. Not really paying you very much, though, are we? Seriously, want to thank you for zooming in tonight. Appreciate all your words. And I did want to have Leah speak very briefly to a couple of things that are happening at the college campus this summer, or hopefully, maybe, planning on.
Yes, this actually speaks to the community role that NVU plays. I'm really, really excited to announce that NVU, in partnership with Catamount Arts, we're bringing a drive-in to stay safe entertainment series to our campuses. And this is going to start on July 11th and continue every Saturday on the Johnson campus. And if you want to drive a little bit on Sunday, it'll be on the Linden campus as well. So July 11th through August, there's going to be a series of concerts and family-friendly movies in our parking lots. At Johnson, it's going to be at the Visual Arts Center parking lot. So you bring your car, they're socially distanced. You will stay in your car or perhaps on top of your car, bring your own snacks, but it's a way to get out, have some fun. The concert time starts at 7 p.m. Parking opens 30 minutes before sunset, and it's $20 per car. All tickets need to be pre-purchased, and there's no drop-in traffic. So be looking for that, and we'll have a link on our website for that. And Eric, you mentioned some other summer programs. I just want to let folks know that we typically host the Brooklyn Ballet in the summer, and we are talking with them, and our goal is to have them come back this summer at a reduced capacity to maintain all of the health and safety rules in place. And we're looking at, it's still a little bit fluid, but maybe mid-July for them to come back to our campus. So that's the summer activities news.
Perfect. Thank you. I had some questions sent to me in emails over the last week about what was going on this summer. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. Once the details are firmed up, I'll make sure we get word out to you on that. And I also just want to thank everyone on the call for their support. We greatly appreciate it, and keep lobbying for that fund, the appropriations to be higher, because it's the root cause of absolutely everything.
And I know Dave's left, but I'll send him a note thanking him personally. I believe this time we can turn it over to Lisa.
All right, so we've been meeting Lamoille County Little League, talking about baseball and softball, and currently there is no programming in place, but we have come to the point where we're looking for families still interested. So if you have youth in your family who might want to play this summer, please contact me at the Town of Johnson email, and we will put together a list of people and start talking about ways we might be able to make a summer program happen. And the rec committee came up with a new challenge for June, which is Come Alive Outside, the Mile a Day Challenge. So if you go to Johnson Recreation VT, there's a community activities link, and you can go through there and sign up for the Mile a Day Challenge. June is, through Johnson Rec also, is the fishing month, and next Saturday, the 13th, is Free Fishing Day for everyone in Vermont. And we have a link on our website for getting a fishing license and maps and etiquette for going fishing and all that. So we introduced our daughters to it this summer. It's a lot of fun and just a nice way for families to get outside while keeping socially distant. Eric was talking earlier. Here's the photo he mentioned. So spread hope. There's some young kids repairing the graffiti at the skate park, and I was down the following day, and the park was being used by many, and it was a really happy, goodwill place full of sunshine and people recreating. So we're glad to see that. Tonight we have returning to us Rockin Ron, the Friendly Pirate, and there's something that I wanted to point out here. This is his front page to his website. If you look here in the purple, he has an educational tab. So those of you staying home this summer or who are educators, if you go on this, there's coloring pages, there's alphabet worksheets that have to do with his lyrics, and there's just lots and lots of fun stuff to use with the kids so that they can have a good time while they're learning. And so I wanted to point that out, and I know we'll be using it at our house this summer. And that is it. Let's welcome Rockin Ron.
So good evening. Great to see everyone. Hi, Leah. How you doing? So I'd like to play a song I wrote that's on a Smuggler's Notch CD that Good Time Charlie sings. It's a history of Smuggler's Notch from the Ice Age to the current day. So sit back, relax. This will only take 3 or 4 hours. The Ice Age had receded, the world had been reborn, the landscape as we know it had taken on its form, and all the native people, they called this place their land, from the mountains to the meadows, to right here where we stand. Hi Abby, hi Charlotte. This is a tale of Smuggler's Notch Resort. You're on the trail of Smuggler's Notch Resort. Okay, pop quiz. Was Vermont one of the original 13 colonies? Yay or nay? Nay, that's right, Eric. That's right, Nat. Beth is in there. Okay, excellent. America was 13 strong. Vermont made it 14. Added to red, white, and blue were mountains made of green. Before the War of 1812, people smuggled goods and hid them in the caves up in Sterling Woods. That was before the avalanche. This is a tale of Smuggler's Notch Resort. You're on the trail of Smuggler's Notch Resort. So that was in the early 1800s. President Thomas Jefferson imposed an embargo, said no trading with France or Britain. But people made their living trading with France or Britain, so they smuggled things through the Notch. And that was when it became known as Smuggler's Notch. But this is probably the more famous instance of it over 100 years later. Then Congress passed a law, no sales of alcohol, but that didn't stop the public from drinking it at all. When bootleggers obtained whiskey, rum, and scotch, they brought them to New England, smuggled through the Notch. Okay, here's the chorus. If you remember that, sing along. This is a tale of Smuggler's Notch Resort. You're on the trail of Smuggler's Notch Resort. Speaking of smugs, we're going to start taking reservations on June 15th, and we're going to open up with programs on June 26th. So stay tuned for more information about that. Okay, then what happened? Oh yes, the whole history of the ski area. In '56, the locals spent their winter days on the slopes of what they called smugglers, not skiways. Later in the '60s, a guy from IBM liked their skiways very much, so he bought it from them. That was Thomas Watson Jr. Sing along. This is a tale of smugglers not resort. You're on the trail of smugglers not resort. Okay, here's what I call the job security verse. A score or more years passed till a man came on the scene. His name is Mr. Stritzler, and he has a dream. By the way, Mr. Stritzler lives in Johnson now. You guys know that? Over on 10 Bends. The vision was 3 mountains with a village at the base that fits into the beauty and wonder of this place. Okay, don't hesitate. Unmute yourself and sing along. This is a tale of smugglers not resort. You're on the trail of smugglers, big finish, not resort. Yeehaw! True story. Smuggler's Notch. Okay. Anybody out there know Pat Mayo? Used to work at Course. Jack Course. Pat Mayo. Okay, so his family had a secret language. They called it Mayo Latin, and I incorporated it into a song. So here's how Mayo Latin worked. You would take consonants. All the consonants would be doubled, and then you put a U between. So let's take Dan. Dan's name would be Dud A Nun. So vowels stay the same, but consonants have a U in between. So Dud A Nun. Shane would be, okay, so there's a couple other rules. The letter S becomes sus, the letter Y is yang, and the letter H is hash. And then Q and X are like vowels, they don't change at all. So Shane's name would be sus hash A yang nun E. Beth would be bub E tut hash. Abby's name would be A bub bub yang. So Mayo Latin. So the chorus of this is yango hasho hasho. What do you think that is? That's yo ho ho. Yango hasho hasho. And if you check out the recording of this song on Spotify or YouTube or whatever, you can hear Pat Mayo singing along in a couple parts if you know him there. Okay. Yango hasho hasho, the Mayo pirate motto. Yango hasho hasho, sung with some vibrato, but they're not talking trash yo, just yango hasho hasho. They're Irish pirates, much like Grace O'Malley, except they are friendly and they dilly-dally. They like to eat, they love to drink, and sleep the day away, oh. They're on their sus hash I pup. Sus hash I pup, you guys know what that is? Sus hash I pup. Shane is thinking, I can see him thinking. That's ship. They're on their sus hash I pup. Pirates of the Mayo. Yango hasho hasho, sing along. Yango hasho hasho, the Mayo pirate motto. Yango hasho hasho, sung with some vibrato, but they're not talking trash yo, just yango hasho hasho. The pirates of the Mayo, but don't ever call them sandwich spread or matey. Yango you might end up on the bread. Ha ha! Yango hasho hasho. All right. Thank you. This is like, you've heard the sound of one hand clapping. Well, that's the same sound as 2 hands clapping on Zoom mute. That's better than the sound of one hand crapping. But that was back when we had the toilet paper shortage. Okay, I played Pirate Pooper last week, so enough of the potty humor. Okay, I have to always play my song, my most popular song. It's my most played song on Spotify. Everyone requests it whenever I do a live show. It's called Shark in the Dark. And whenever you hear me say shark, put a shark fin on your head. Oh, I see the sharks over there. Lisa's got her shark going. Shark in the dark, sneaking round out of sight. Shark in the dark. Watch your left and watch your right. Shark in the dark. Gotta get a little bite. Shark in the dark. Working up an appetite when you see those eyes. Big surprise. Shark in the dark, quite a fright. Shark in the dark. Wonder what it's gonna do. Shark in the dark. We don't even have a clue. Shark in the dark. Searching for a snack to chew. Shark in the dark. Starting to get hungry too. When you see the fin and a toothy grin, it's a shark in the dark. Boo hoo. Boo! Ha ha! That's great. Johnson, you're awesome. Hang in there, stay strong. NVU rules.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank everyone tonight, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks
Thank
for your
you
starting
all.
words, Eric. That was really
Thank you.
good. It was good to hear. So thank you.
Bye.